The throbbing in my ankle was a living thing, syncing with the clock. I stood there, balancing on my good leg, humiliating myself for mobility. To them, it was a transaction, not a plea. I asked my family, "Need surgery. Cost is $4,500, or I can't walk." Dad said, "We bought a boat." Mom said, "It's a lesson." Sister told me to sell my laptop. My brother, a struggling mechanic, came over. I sold my tools. "Here is $500. He did not know what I was hiding. Just moments before Caleb arrived, the air in the room had been suffocatingly dry. My father, Dennis, didn't even look up from the mahogany table. He was meticulously polishing the brass railing of a scale model yacht, his brow furrowed in concentration. The smell of expensive furniture polish stung my nose, masking the scent of the blood seeping into my bandage. "Ethan," he said, blowing a speck of dust off the miniature deck. "We've already put the deposit down on the new vessel. $25,000. It is non-refundable." The cruelty wasn't in his refusal, but in the casual nature of it. My mother, Pamela, sat on the velvet chaise, turning the glossy page of a travel magazine. She took a delicate sip of herbal tea, the china cup clinking softly against the saucer. "You are 28, honey," she said, not meeting my eyes. "You made the choice to drive that unreliable car. Maybe limping for a few months will teach you to be more careful." She spoke as if my disability was a boarding school demerit. From the corner armchair, my sister Ashley smirked, the blue light of her phone illuminating her bored expression. "Seriously, Ethan. Why don't you sell that laptop you are always glued to? You're freelance. G isn't paying the bills. If you are here begging." I looked at the toy boat on the table. It was worth 5 times the cost of my surgery. It wasn't even the real vessel. It was a promise of future luxury, a fiberglass hull they valued more than their son's ability to walk. That was when the heavy oak door creaked open. Caleb stepped inside, looking out of place in his grease-stained coveralls against the pristine cream carpets. He looked exhausted, his eyes red, rimmed, smelling of motor oil and stale coffee. He didn't look at our parents. He walked straight to me, slept, his heavy boots thudding on the floor. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash, mostly 10s and 20s. His hands were calloused and shaking slightly as he pressed the dirty bills into my palm. "It's barely 500, he whispered, his voice rough with shame. I sold the snap, on set to the new guy. I looked at the money. My parents had millions in assets and wouldn't give a dime. My brother sold his livelihood to give me everything. I didn't scream at my parents. I didn't beg. I turned around and walked out on my broken leg. In that moment, the son who sought their approval died. The creditor was born, and I knew exactly how to collect. The drive back to my studio apartment was a blur of red taillights and white, hot agony. I collapsed onto the floor, my back pressed against the cold drywall. My ankle was a swollen purple ruin, pulsing violently against the tight bandage. I held Caleb's $500 in my hand. It smelled of grace and sacrifice. It was enough for painkillers, maybe, but not a surgeon. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the refrigerator's hum. I was alone with the throbbing rhythm of my own heartbeat. I stared at the eviction notice taped to my peeling kitchenette cabinets. It was a simple choice now. Pay the rent and limp forever, or find a way to fix my leg and lose the roof over my head. My phone buzzed on the floorboards with a notification from my bank. Overdraft alert. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. My parents were sleeping on Egyptian cotton sheets, while I debated selling my plasma. Anger usually burns hot, but this felt different. It was a glacial, calculating kind of rage. My mind drifted back to Caleb's face in that foyer. He hadn't just given me cash. He had handed over his future. A mechanic without tools is just a man with dirty hands. He worked 60 hours a week at that shop. Selling his snap on set meant he was defenseless against the foreman's demands. He effectively fired himself to give me a fighting chance. I smoothed the crumpled bills against the cheap laminate floor. The Queen's face on the 20 looked indifferent. I owed him more than repayment. I owed him a life. I dragged myself to my desk, ignoring the lightning bolts shooting up my shin. I opened my laptop. The screens glow harsh in the dark room. I wasn't looking for freelance gigs anymore. I pulled up public records on my father's business dealings and property taxes. If they claimed poverty to their own son while buying yachts, there was a paper trail. Rich people leave wakes like ships. I needed to see where the money was really going. The pain became background noise. Focus was the only drug I had left. I couldn't fight them from a wheelchair. I needed to be mobile to dismantle them. I opened a new tab and typed in the URL for a high-risk lender I had seen on late-night television. The interest rates were criminal, designed to trap the desperate and the foolish. I didn't care. I wasn't planning on paying it back with wages. I filled out the application with steady fingers. Name, Social Security, income. I lied about the income. I was betting on a future where I held the leverage. The loan approval hit my inbox 3 minutes later. The money would be wired by morning. I looked at Caleb's cash again. I wouldn't spend a cent of it. I grabbed an envelope and shoved the grease-stained bills deep inside, sealing it shut. This wasn't spending money, it was the seed capital for my conscience. I wrote, Caleb, on the front in Sharpie. He didn't know what I was hiding yet. But when I paid him back, it wouldn't be with cash. It would be with the deed to the shop. 2 weeks after the surgery, I was sitting on my thrift store couch staring at a bowl of lukewarm ramen. My leg was in a cast, propped up on a stack of old magazines. I was physically healing, but financially I was bleeding out. The predatory loan payments were due in 3 days, and I had exactly $42 in my bank account. I was calculating whether I could sell my plasma while on painkillers when I remembered the crumpled lottery ticket in my jeans pocket. It was a tax on desperation. I fished the slip of thermal paper from my laundry pile. It was wrinkled and stained with coffee. A remnant of the day I picked up my prescription. I smoothed it against the coffee table and opened the lottery app on my cracked phone. The loading circle spun for an eternity. The room smelled of old soup and dust. I just wanted $10 for dinner. The numbers finally popped up, bright and mocking against the gloom of my apartment. I looked down at the paper, then back at the screen. 12, 18, 4, 33, 49. Powerball 7. My eyes darted from the phone to the paper and back again. I blinked, expecting the numbers to rearrange themselves into a loss. They didn't move. The ticket didn't catch fire. The refrigerator didn't stop humming. I sat there in the terrifying silence of my apartment, listening to the traffic outside. In the movies, people pop champagne. In real life, when you hand a starving person a feast, they don't dance. They get suspicious. I felt cold. $12 million. The sum was abstract, a string of digits that didn't feel real. But the nausea in my gut was very real. I looked at the cast on my leg, the symbol of my family's neglect. If I called my mother right now, she would answer on the first ring. Ashley would suddenly need a business partner. Dad would be proud of my investment strategy. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I couldn't tell them. I absolutely could not tell them. I didn't cash the ticket. I didn't call Caleb, even though every instinct screamed to share this. He was too honest. He would want to celebrate, and celebration draws attention. Instead, I grabbed my laptop. I searched for corporate lawyers, specifically those who handled high net worth anonymity. I found a firm in a glass tower downtown. The kind that charged $800 an hour to keep secrets. I wasn't going to claim the prize as Ethan Miller. I was going to claim it as a ghost. The pain in my legs seemed to recede, replaced by a buzzing clarity. Money wasn't just freedom, it was ammunition. I looked at the whiteboard where I had mapped out my parents' fraudulent timeline. Before today, it was a conspiracy theory. Now, it was a shopping list. I wasn't just going to pay off my medical debt. I was going to buy the debt that kept their fake empire afloat. I closed the laptop. The victim was gone. The investor had arrived. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor popped my ears. I stepped into the lobby of Sterling and Associates, leaning heavily on my new cane. The reception area smelled of lilies and intimidation. I looked like a vagrant in my thrift store flannel. But the receptionist didn't sneer. Mr. Sterling had already verified the funds. I was ushered into a corner office that floated above the city skyline. Sterling, a man who wore suits that cost more than my car, stood up. He didn't offer a handshake. He offered a leather chair. "The trust is established," Sterling said, sliding a thick binder across the mahogany desk. "Your identity is buried under 3 layers of corporate shielding." I opened the folder, staring at the name I had chosen, Chimera Holdings. It was a monster from mythology, a beast made of disparate parts. It fit perfectly. I wasn't just hiding my money, I was weaponizing it. "And the second matter?" I asked. Sterling nodded, his expression professional and blank. He tapped a second, thinner file. This was the one I really wanted. "We ran the forensic audit on Dennis and Pamela Miller as requested," Sterling said. It wasn't difficult to find the cracks. I opened the file expecting to see millions in assets. Instead, I saw a sea of red ink. The numbers screamed from the page. The Mercer Island estate was mortgaged to the hilt, with payments 3 months behind. They were hiding foreclosure notices in the same drawer, where they kept their country club invites. The wealth was a hologram. They were bleeding cash every single day. My finger traced the line item for the boat deposit. $25,000. The reason they refused to fix my leg. I expected to see a wire transfer from a savings account. Instead, it was charged to a high-interest credit card. They didn't have the cash either. They borrowed money at 22% interest to secure a status symbol they couldn't afford, while letting their son walk out crippled. The realization hit me harder than the car accident. It wasn't just malice. It was pathetic, desperate vanity. "And the daughter's business?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Sterling flipped a page. "Technically insolvent. The SPY is surviving only because your father is illegally siphoning equity from the house to cover her payroll." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Ashley told me to sell my laptop to learn responsibility. Meanwhile, she was burning through stolen money to play CEO. They were all complicit in a massive, fragile lie. They weren't titans of industry. They were grifters in designer clothes, robbing Peter to pay Paul. I closed the folder, feeling a strange shift in gravity. For years, I had looked up at them, terrified of their judgment. I thought they were giants who simply chose to step on me. Now, looking at the math, I realized they were just drowning rats, standing on each other's shoulders to keep their noses above water. They refused to help me not just because they were cruel, but because they were broke. They were terrified that one slip would shatter the illusion. I wasn't the failure. "What is your move, Mr. Miller?" Sterling asked, uncapping a fountain pen. I looked at the city below, a grid of lights and power. "They are in default on the mortgage and the business loans," I said. "The bank will be looking to offload these toxic assets." I turned back to him. My decision crystal clear. Buy it all. I don't want to just sue them. I want to own the debt. Sterling smiled for the first time. The trap was set. They belong to me now. I parked my sedan 3 blocks away from the Rainier Club. The rain drummed a steady rhythm on the roof, masking the hum of the audio equipment. Through the encrypted feed, the clatter of silverware and the murmur of old money came through crystal clear. I adjusted the volume, wincing as my leg cramped in the tight space. I wasn't invited to this lunch, but I was the one paying for it. Today was the day. The mouse invited the cat to dinner, and the cat was too arrogant to notice the trap. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller." Sterling's voice was smooth as velvet, dripping with the kind of upper crust accent my parents worshipped. "Kimera Holdings specializes in distressed assets with high potential. We see the value in your property, and frankly, we see the value in you." I could practically hear my mother preening. They were desperate for validation, starving for someone to tell them they were still the royalty of Mercer Island. Sterling wasn't just offering a lifeline. He was offering a mirror that showed them exactly what they wanted to see. It was a masterclass in manipulation. My father cleared his throat, that pompous sound he made when he felt important. "Well, we have certainly put a lot of equity into the estate," Dennis said, his voice booming slightly too loud. "It is good to see a firm that appreciates quality. Most banks these days are run by algorithms, not gentlemen." He was trying to sound like a peer, a fellow titan of industry discussing a merger. In reality, he was a beggar in a bespoke suit. He had no idea he was negotiating with the son he'd discarded. "Precisely," Sterling continued, reeling them in. "That is why we are offering a sale-leaseback agreement. We purchase the property and the business debt immediately. You clear your record. No foreclosure, no public embarrassment. You stay in the home as tenants for a nominal fee." There was a pause, calculated for effect. "Plus, as a signing bonus to help with operational liquidity, we are issuing a corporate credit card with a $50,000 limit." The silence that followed was heavy with greed. I gripped the steering wheel tight. They would sell their souls for credit. 50,000. My mother breathed, her composure cracking. "And we stay in the house." Sterling didn't hesitate. "It is a standard retention package for our VIP clients." He slid the document across the table. Buried on page 42 was clause 42B. It was a legal guillotine. It stated that as tenants, any violation of the lease terms, including late payment by even 1 hour or unauthorized commercial use, resulted in immediate non-judicial eviction. No grace period. No court hearings. Instant termination. It was the deadliest sentence I had ever written. A rational person would ask, "What is the catch?" A scared person would read every word. But my parents weren't rational, they were narcissists. They possessed the absolute, unshakable belief that the universe owed them a favor. They didn't see a predatory contract designed to destroy them. They saw validation. Of course a hedge fund wanted to bail them out. Of course they deserved a spending limit. They viewed luck not as a random occurrence, but as a character trait. Arrogance isn't just a flaw, it's a blindfold. "Where do we sign?" Dennis asked, the eagerness stripping away his dignity. I heard the scratch of the expensive pen against the paper. It was a sharp, final sound, like a lock clicking shut on a prison cell. "Excellent," Sterling said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Welcome to the Chimera family." As they laughed and ordered a second bottle of vintage wine on their new tab, I took my headphones off. They thought they had just cheated the system. They didn't realize the VIP package was just the last meal before the execution. Thanksgiving at the Miller household was never just a dinner. It was a stage play designed to showcase how perfect their lives were. But this year, fueled by the Chimera Holdings credit line, it was a coronation. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, picking at my stuffing. The room was suffocatingly warm, filled with the scent of roasted turkey and expensive perfume. Ashley was holding court, waving a glass of vintage wine paid for unknowingly by me. She was wearing a new diamond tennis bracelet that glittered under the chandelier. It was a grotesque display of cannibalism. It is just so refreshing to finally work with partners who understand vision. Ashley gushed, gesturing vaguely with her wine glass toward the ceiling. Chimera isn't like those stuffy banks. They get it. They know you have to spend money to make money. She took a long sip, her lips staining purple. I watched the liquid slosh in the glass. It was a 1996 vintage, charged to the corporate card yesterday. She was drinking my liquidity. "They really seem to trust your judgment," I said quietly. Ashley laughed, a sharp sound that grated on my nerves. "They trust competence." "Ethan." My father nodded, slicing the turkey with a ceremonial gravity that made me want to laugh. The knife glinted in the candlelight, carving thick slabs of meat. "Exactly right. It takes a certain caliber of person to attract that kind of investment." They saw the potential in this family. He paused, the carving knife suspended in the air, and looked around the table with satisfied ownership. "We have turned a corner. The market sees us for what we are." He believed his own press release. He didn't know he was the turkey, and I was holding the knife. Then he looked down the table at me, his eyes heavy with performative pity. "You should really take notes, Ethan. Look at your sister. She knows how to leverage capital. She is a builder." He placed a slice of turkey on my plate with condescending charity. "You are still working for wages. You are playing small ball, while the adults are in the big leagues. It is embarrassing, frankly." I gripped my fork until my knuckles turned white. "Maybe Chimera just likes risky bets," I said, keeping my voice level. The insult bounced off my armor of secrets. I glanced across the table at Caleb. He sat hunched over his plate, looking like he wanted to disappear into the upholstery. He was wearing a stiff button-down shirt that looked uncomfortable on his frame. He hadn't touched his wine. He knew who they were. He remembered the hospital bills and the cold shoulders. Yet he sat here out of some misplaced sense of familial duty. He caught my eye and offered a weak, apologetic smile. It broke my heart. They didn't deserve him. They didn't deserve the air he breathed, let alone his loyalty. My mother, Pamela, saw the exchange and sneered. She dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin, leaving a smear of lipstick. "Don't be jealous, Ethan. It is unbecoming. At least someone here is securing our legacy." She reached out and patted Ashley's hand. "We are just glad one of our children has ambition." They were eating food I paid for, in a house effectively owned by my company, wearing clothes charged to my credit line. I no longer felt insulted. I felt detached, like a scientist watching lab rats devour poisoned bait. The experiment was nearing its conclusion. "I need to use the restroom," I said, pushing my chair back. The scraping sound echoed in the sudden silence. No one objected, they were too busy congratulating themselves to care about my bladder. I walked out of the dining room, my cane tapping a rhythmic beat on the hardwood. The hallway was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the dinner. I walked past the family portraits, smiling faces that masked rotten souls. I slipped into the guest bathroom and locked the door. The marble sink looked cold. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone and opened the secure admin portal for Chimera Holdings. The interface was sleek and dark. I navigated to the tenant management system. There it was, the Miller Estate. Status active. Auto pay scheduled for midnight. I took a deep breath, the air hissing through my teeth. My thumb hovered over the maintenance mode. Toggle. One tap. That was all it took. I pressed the screen. Payment gateway disabled. A small green checkmark confirmed the command. At 12:01 a.m., their attempt to pay rent would fail. Clause 42B would trigger instantly. I washed my hands, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look like a monster. I looked like a man who was finally balancing the scales. I unlocked the door and walked back to the dining room. The laughter was louder now, fueled by the wine and their delusion of safety. I sat down and picked up my fork. "Is everything all right?" Caleb asked softly. "Everything is perfect," I replied, taking a bite of the turkey. It tasted like ash, but I swallowed it anyway. The clock on the wall ticked. They were already ghosts. The sun rose over Mercer Island, burning off the morning mist. I sat in the back of a black SUV, watching the house. It looked peaceful, a monument to unearned wealth. Beside me, a private security team checked their gear. Behind us, two unmarked federal sedans waited for the signal. My phone buzzed with a notification: lease terminated. They were officially trespassing. I signaled the driver to move. We rolled up the driveway, crunching gravel. It wasn't a homecoming. It was a raid. I gripped my cane, ready to walk into the fire. The front door flew open before we even knocked. Dennis stood there in his silk robe, face purple with rage. He didn't see the security team yet, only me. "The rent didn't go through," he screamed, waving his phone. "Tell your boss to fix his system before I sue him." I stepped out of the vehicle, the air crisp against my skin. "There is no glitch," I said. "And Mr. Sterling isn't coming." Two large guards stepped up behind me. Dennis faltered, finally noticing the muscle. His arrogance flickered, replaced by fear. "You have no right to be here," my mother shouted, appearing behind Dennis. She looked disheveled, clutching her coffee mug like a weapon. "We want the owner. We want the chairman of Chimera Holdings." I walked up the steps, my cane clicking on the stone. I stopped inches from my father's face. "You are looking at him," I said. The silence was absolute. It was a cognitive failure. They couldn't process the data. "I bought the debt," I said. "I own the mortgage. I own the business loans. I own you." I pushed past them into the foyer. Ashley was there, looking pale. I pulled a tablet from my coat and cast the screen to the hallway television. It displayed a timeline of their finances. The credit card debt. The second mortgage, the embezzlement. "You weren't victims," I said, scrolling through the evidence. "You were stealing from your own future to buy status." Dennis stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing. The myth of the Miller Empire evaporated in pixels. They were just common thieves in expensive suits. The truth was ugly. "But the lease?" Ashley stammered, pointing at the contract on the screen. "We have a lease." I swiped to page 42. Clause 42B was highlighted in red. "Immediate termination upon missed payment." I recited. You missed the window by 8 hours. I looked at my sister. You signed it without reading. You were too busy spending the credit limit. She slumped against the wall, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. They had signed their own eviction notice. Their greed was the pen, but I provided the ink. Dennis snapped. The humiliation was too much for his ego to bear. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. You ungrateful parasite! He roared. He didn't make it 2 steps. The security guards intercepted him instantly, pinning his arms behind his back. He struggled, spitting curses, but he was an old man fighting professionals. Physical assault, I noted calmly. That is another lease violation. I didn't flinch. I watched him struggle with the detachment of a judge watching a guilty man squirm. He looked small. Panting, Dennis stopped fighting. A cruel smile twisted his face. You think you won? He hissed. You can take the house. I have money you don't know about. Accounts in the Caymans. I will bury you in legal fees until you are back in that studio apartment. He was playing his ace. He thought his secret stash made him invincible. He thought he was the only one who knew about the wires. He didn't realize I had been tracking his digital footprint. He just confessed to a felony. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single, folded document. I know about the Caymans, I said softly. I held up IRS Form 211. Application for award for original information. His face went slack. I reported those accounts 12 weeks ago. The wire fraud, the tax evasion, the shell companies. I stepped closer. The whistleblower reward is up to 30% of the recovered assets. Your secret money is going to pay for my retirement. The color drained from his face. He wasn't just broke. He was hunted. I signaled to the door. The 2 federal agents stepped inside, their badges glinting in the foyer light. Dennis Miller, Pamela Miller, Ashley Miller, the lead agent announced. You are under arrest for tax evasion and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The sound of handcuffs clicking was louder than any scream. My mother began to sound, a jagged, ugly sound. Ashley looked at me with betrayal, but I saw only justice. They were being escorted out of the house they loved, into the back of a government sedan. The door closed, leaving me alone in the sudden silence. The house was empty. The furniture, the art, the polished floors. It was all just scenery for a play that was finally canceled. I looked at my leg. It still ached in the damp weather, a permanent reminder of the price of admission. I didn't feel joy. I felt a profound, quiet relief. The ledger was balanced. I walked to the window and watched the cars drive away. It was time to find the only family member who mattered. The industrial district smelled of burnt rubber and ozone. The black SUV pulled up to the curb, outside the mechanic shop, the place that had consumed his youth. Caleb was sitting on a stack of tires near the bay door, his head in his hands. He looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of his usual energy. The news of the arrest had clearly hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't crying, but he was vibrating with a silent, heavy shock. He looked up as I approached. I heard, Caleb said, his voice cracking. He wiped his hands on a rag that was already black with grease. Mom called me from the holding cell. She said that you did this. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and confusion, trying to reconcile his crippled brother with the man who just toppled our parents. Ethan, tell me you didn't do something illegal. Even now, with his world ending, he was worried about my soul. That was the difference between him and them. I didn't answer him with words. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a heavy set of keys attached to a brass tag. I tossed them to him. He caught them instinctively, the metal clinking against his calloused palm. I didn't break the law, I said, leaning against the brick wall. I just enforced it. And I made some investments along the way. Caleb looked at the keys, then back at the shop behind him. What is this? The confusion in his eyes was painful. I bought the building this morning, I said. And the lot next door. I also tracked down the pawn shop where you sold your snap-on chest. I pointed to the delivery truck idling down the street. Your tools are in the back. All of them. Caleb's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at the rusted sign above us, then at the keys. He was trembling. Ethan, I can't take this. It is too much. Where did you get the money? I reached into my jacket for the final piece of evidence. I pulled out the white envelope, still sealed with Caleb written on it. I won the lottery, I said. 12 million. But this is worth more. I handed him the envelope containing the greasy bills he gave me months ago. You sold your life to save my leg. I just used the capital to buy you a future. He took the envelope, tears spilling over. He finally understood the true scale of the debt. We are starting over, I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. No more debt. No more lies. Just us. Caleb gripped the keys tight, the metal biting into his palm. He looked at the shop, not as a prison of wage labor, but as a kingdom. I walked back to the SUV, the limp and step barely noticeable. My parents taught me the price of everything. My brother taught me the value of loyalty. I finally possessed the only asset that mattered.